last week, but
So you got to say it now, or
well, he's knee high.
uh,
Uh,
that wasn't even. I don't even know.
That's a dad
Nehemiah,
joke
yeah.
if I've ever heard one.
Anyway, all right. So I got the map up here. I'll use it in a little bit, but I'm going to use it because with as difficult as it was to get it connected, so we're going to use it. So last week, Nehemiah got word that the city of Jerusalem, the walls and the gates of it had been torn down, had been burned, had never been rebuilt. Keep in mind, again, this is some 150 years after they had been destroyed by the Babylonians. And so even after the temple was rebuilt, the city walls and the protection of the wall, that the walls provided the city, have never been rebuilt. So essentially at this point, Jerusalem is not a city to be longed for, except for the fact that the temple's there. There's nothing there that would draw somebody to Jerusalem except the temple is there. And at this time, the temple is really not grand. It's not elaborate. It's just kind of been a rebuilded building, but it wasn't anywhere near the splendor of Solomon's temple, and it certainly wasn't. It didn't have much splendor at all, because once again, without the city being protected by walls, thieves and people could just come right in and take stuff. So the city was a shambles. And again, the walls had been destroyed some 150 years, and yet the temple had been, at this time, probably in operation for about 50 years. And no one had taken any initiative to rebuild the walls. So Nehemiah gets word about the state of the city. He has a burden to go back and rebuild the gates and the walls. And so that's where chapter 1 left off. Also remember in chapter 1 that Nehemiah says that he is the king's cupbearer. So he not only tastes the food to make sure that it's not poisoned, but he would perhaps be even the one that would choose the menu that the king and his entourage would have. So Nehemiah, being a cupbearer of the king, is a high-ranking, very highly trusted official. You don't just give the cupbearer's job to just any old Joe off the street. To be a cupbearer, you were filled with integrity and honesty, and was also one that would protect the king. So anyway, that's where we're at here as we begin chapter 2. Now, we're going to read here in verse 1, the month Nisan, which is roughly March and April on our calendars today. Just so you're aware of that. And I've got something to bring up in a little while, but I'm not gonna do that right now. So anyway, Nehemiah chapter 2. We'll start here with let's see, verse 1. I guess would be a good spot.
Nehemiah 2. And it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine, and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid.
So we see here the 20th year of Artaxerxes, in the month Nisan. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. I think maybe after I get the lesson done. Keep that in mind. But notice here, he says that he is in presence of the king and he is sad. Now, in those times, to be in the presence of the king would, even for Nehemiah or somebody of his stature, to be in the presence of the king should bring you joy, because here you are in front of this great man. There should be no reason for you to be sad because of the environment that you are in. So Artaxerxes sees that Nehemiah is sad, realizes he's not sick, so this has to be sadness of heart. Now, I think in some ways this is keen on Artaxerxes' part to notice this of Nehemiah, that he's not sick, but he's sad. And so he asks him, why? Well, I think, too, and the commentators believe that Nehemiah became sore afraid because you could be executed for not enjoying your time being in the king's company. That would be cause for execution. Now, Perhaps, I don't know whether Artaxerxes was leaning toward that. We don't know. But we do see here that Nehemiah was afraid because the king noticed that he wasn't his old chipper self. Anyway, verse 3.
And said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said unto the king, If it please the king, if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldst send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it.
So the the king asked Nehemiah what's wrong. Nehemiah believes that keep in mind, I haven't said this, but keep in mind that we learned from chapter 1 that Nehemiah prayed about this for 4 months. Once he got word that the city was in shambles, he prayed to God for 4 months to give him a burden and an avenue in which to go back and rebuild the walls. So this is not something that's all been on a whim. This has been 4 months in the making. And Nehemiah here tells the king, why shouldn't I be sad? The city of my fathers, now I want to understand, Nehemiah had never been to Jerusalem, had never been to Judah, had never been to Israel. But he realizes, even though he lives 900 miles away, his homeland and his city that represents his God and his forefathers is in shambles, is nowhere near what it should be or what it will be one day or what it used to be. And so he has this burden for a city that he's never been to, but he has a burden for it because that is his heritage. That's where he's from. I remember a year ago last August, Dad wanted to go down to Fairfield and go by the old home place where he was born and where my grandparents, where his grandparents lived. And we had been by there a few times in the years, but this time when we went back, Dad was he was just tore up over it because it's just in shambles, the house is. And his grandpa's old tractor, the very first one he ever owned, just was out there in the weeds. That really bothered Dad. And in some ways, we can understand why Dad would have that feeling toward the old home place because he had been there, he lived there, he grew up there. But on a much grander scale, here's Nehemiah having perhaps the same type of feelings toward Jerusalem that my dad had toward the place where he grew up. So while I can understand my dad feeling that way, I think perhaps it might be difficult for us to understand why Nehemiah feels this way. But I do want to reiterate the fact that Nehemiah knows that that is the city of his heritage, of his forefathers, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. I got that out of order, didn't I? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're there. They're there, and that's where he longs to be to rebuild that. So that's the importance of this and why he has this longing for this city. So he says in verse 4, when the king asked him, what do you want? I can just picture Nehemiah under his breath saying, Lord, help me here. And that's, it's what he says there essentially in verse 4. So I prayed to the God of heaven. You don't have much time to go, give your petitions. You got to make a decision here really quick. So he tells him in verse 5, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in thy sight, would you let me go back to Judah, to the city of my fathers, that I may build it? Will you let me leave my job here as cupbearer and go and rebuild this city that my forefathers are from, or buried? Verse 6.
And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, For how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me. And I set him a time.
So the king says, well, how long do you think you're going to be gone? Now, Nehemiah doesn't, I don't know why we don't get his answer in the scriptures is how long he tells the king he's going to be gone. It just says that I set him a time. Now, we will find out later in the book that he will be gone 12 years. Now, as I said last week, it only took 52 days to rebuild the walls. We'll get more into that later. But I don't know why Nehemiah didn't tell us the time frame that he was looking for here. Keep in mind, too, it would take a 4-month journey to go from Shushan to Jerusalem. So, there's 8 months just in travel time. But we don't really know how long Nehemiah told him. And perhaps, in some ways, Nehemiah really had no idea the amount of time it was going to be. But I don't know why here in Scripture we don't have what the answer that Nehemiah gave. But the king asked him, how long will your journey be, and when will you be back? So Nehemiah answers him, and again, we don't have that answer in Scripture. But Nehemiah does have another request here beginning in verse 7. Whoop, push the button.
Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah, and a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertained to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me, according to the good hand of my God upon me.
So Nehemiah asks for letters of permission and passage to go from Shushan to Jerusalem. Again, a 4-month journey, 900 some miles. And they're going to have to cross these different territories. Now, it's all essentially in the Persian Empire, but there's different territories or states that they would have to go through in order to get to Jerusalem. And the road there was not one filled with state troopers and policemen to keep everyone safe and honest. I mean, you could run into a lot of marauders along the way. That's a word I don't use very often anymore. Marauders? Yeah. Robber barons. Anyway, so he asked for letters of permission so that he could pass safely. But notice what else he asked for in verse 8. Give me a letter for Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that I can have the timbers to make the stuff that I need to rebuild things. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Just like Zerubbabel and just like Ezra, they were given blessings by the Persian kings to go back to Jerusalem to do whatever they needed to do to rebuild whatever they needed to rebuild, with the full blessing of not only the king of Persia, but also obviously the good pleasure and the hand of God being on them. So we see here that Nehemiah's prayer request for help and the materials to do this job, this 4-month prayer that he had in chapter 1, is paying off. And God has touched the heart of Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, to give letters, whatever you need, you can have. So we see here the hand of God throughout all of this. And we've seen it in the book of Ezra, we've seen it in the book of Esther, and now we're seeing it here played out in the book of Nehemiah. Well, let me do 2, and then we'll have a question if you got any questions. Chapter 9, verse 9.
Beyond the river, and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel.
All right. Verse 9, not only does Nehemiah go, but the king sends him a band of men to travel with him. Now, we don't know how many, but they've got captains and horsemen, so perhaps hundreds of people was sent for protection of Nehemiah. I don't know. I'm just throwing a number out there to help us understand that Nehemiah was not in some small band of men, but to have captains, plural, would tell me that there's several of the king's men that are going with him. Notice, too, there in verse 10, we get to Jerusalem. It's funny, between verses 9 and 10, a lot of stuff happens that Nehemiah doesn't write about or tell us. Because, again, it's a 4-month journey. But apparently when they get to Jerusalem, these 2 Yehus, Sanballat and Tobiah, when they show up, they start giving them trouble right off the bat. It grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. Perhaps I'll talk more about Sanballat and Tobiah here after a bit, but we've already got opposition and we just showed up into town. And, as we'll find out in the following verses, Tobiah and Sanballat don't even know why Nehemiah showed up, other than they think that he's there for the city. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Any comments or questions through these first 10 verses? Lila's the only one that's got anything to say. I mean, this is an easy narrative to follow. It's not like, really nothing in depth here, but I want us to understand that the hand of God is playing out in all of that. So in verse 10, we do see that Sanballat, he is a Horonite, which those were people that lived in Samaria at this time. And if you remember in Ezra chapter 3 or 4, it was the Samaritans that were really given Zerubbabel fits on rebuilding the temple. And so Sanballat here, he was of that area, and so perhaps he's against rebuilding Jerusalem because it might take away his stature from his city or from his area. And the same way with Tobiah. Now Tobiah was married into the priestly line, but he was not a Jew. He just had a Jewish name. It says there he was an Ammonite, which the Ammonites were children of Lot and his daughter. When Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, Lot and his daughters escaped. Later on, Lot had a relationship with his daughter, and they had a son. They called him Ammon. And so the Ammonites are relatives to the Hebrews, but they were also enemies throughout history. And they lived south of the Dead Sea in that area, but that's really not relevant to the lesson here. But we see here two men already causing issue with Nehemiah. All right, moving on, verse 11.
So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. Neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, and to the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire.
All right. I'll try to point on this map here. So I tried my best, and I didn't do too bad, I will have to admit. But this is roughly the area of the old city of Jerusalem back in this time frame. It was about 160 acres large. Now, that's from Google. Do that what you want. But when I looked at the map, there was an area called Old City, and so I kind of circled that area. And it's about a half mile by about a half mile, which is roughly 160 acres. So at some point, Nehemiah was staying in this southwestern area because it tells us that he leaves and he goes by the Dragon Well to the Dung Port. So the Dragon Well, we believe, was somewhere in the southwest corner. And as he traveled along the outskirts of the city, he then come to the Dung Port, which was on the southeast corner of the city. And then it says there, did we read it? Verse 15. Whoop. Oh, let's read verse 14 and 15, and I'll pick this up.
And I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool. But there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then went I up in the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned.
All right, so we think what he did, and again, this is today, so, what was there in Nehemiah's time, they never took a picture of. You'll get that in a minute. But we think he started here basically on the southwest corner. He went around the south edge to the Dung Gate, which was nearly on the southeast corner. He went up the Kidron Valley, the creek there, and now Scripture is not clear whether he couldn't go any further west and come around. So he turned around and went back the way he came, or he did in fact turn and go to the west and then back down and come back into the city. So either way, he's just looking on the outskirts of the city to check and see what is there and how the condition of the entire city. Now again, the way Scripture is reading, we don't know whether he made a complete circuit or whether he just went halfway and came back. It's really not important for our discussion, but just something to point out. I will say that this area is roughly the size of New Hebron. If you went from the blacktop, the Hardinville blacktop, to the hill down here, and if you went from John and Shirley's house to about a half mile where that road on the east side turns and goes south, that's about the size of what Jerusalem was at that time. So take that for what you will. Now, I was kind of wondering how Nehemiah did this at night. I tried to figure out when the full moon would have been during this time, and those results were inconclusive. I kind of thought, well, if he had a clear night on a full moon, he could see pretty well around there. but he may have had a
Candlelight.
candlelight. I'm assuming that he
Magnifying
did,
glass.
and perhaps it was a full moon. Because in what limited time I spent trying to look at that, I wasn't necessarily satisfied that it was, but it could have been a full moon as well. I say all that to say he just made a circuit to try to inspect what was going on, and at this time he says there in verse 12, nobody knows why he's there. He's not told anybody, but it does seem like he did take some men with him on this excursion. Now I don't know about you, but I would think that if I'm getting up in the middle of the night to go follow somebody on the back of a horse, and just around, I would want to know, what are we doing here? But apparently Nehemiah never told a soul why he was actually there and what he was actually doing. And again, I would think if I spent 4 months with him, traveling from Shushan to Jerusalem, I'm going to want to ask him, what are we doing? What's going on? But I guess if you're in the army, you don't ask questions, you just do. It don't matter why you're here, you're just going to do it. Yeah. Anyway. But does everybody have this picture of what he's doing? He's just making this inspection around the city. I did have another picture here. That's Harrison. That's Lincoln. Let's see. No, well, hang on a minute. I'm going the wrong way. I don't know how well this will show. That's roughly a representation of the city, which is kind of roughly what I had up there from Google Maps. You can see the Temple Mount there on the that'd be the right side, I guess. So, anyway. But again, for our context, perhaps it was about the size of New Hebron, just to kind of give us some semblance of an idea of how small this city was. Again, at this time, this was not a prominent city by any means, but it did hold the tabernacle of God in it. And people would go there to worship because that's where the tabernacle of God was. All right? Okay, I don't think I need any more of that. Let's see. Whoop. I'm not going to do that right now.
Were you doing more pictures?
Well, I may do something later. I'm just going to put that back up there. Oh, all right, don't matter. All right, any comments or questions about that? All right. Moving on now to verse 16.
And the rulers knew not whither I went, or what I did. Neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach.
So, apparently in verse 17, the morning has come and the men are awake now, and they're gathered around, and Nehemiah now tells of the plan that he has, which is to remind them of the condition of the city. It lies in waste. This is a backwater town. Nobody wants to come here because it's just open for thieves and robbers to come. There's no protection. There's no safety. It's just a ramshackle of a city. Is that a word, ramshackle? What did I have? Anyway, ramshackle. There you go. He said, let us build up the wall that we be no more a reproach. No one can make fun of us if we have a wall of protection around us. Again, which any prominent city in this time frame would have a wall of protection around them. That was the way it was back then. Again, there was no police force or that type of thing to keep out robbers and the like, so that's why they would build a wall. And he says, we're a reproach. We're just a backwater town. There ain't nobody wanting to come here and stay. And so, verse 18, he tells them his plan.
And I told them of the hand of my God which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work.
So Nehemiah's plan, this speech that he gives to them, fires up these men, and they're ready to rise up and build and go to work. And they strengthen their hands for this good work. They've got their backbone. They're ready to go. Let's get this done. Now again, Nehemiah has the blessing of the king, and the blessing of the king to give to the keeper of the forest to make the timber and build and provide whatever materials are needed to build the walls. So it's not like they now have a struggle of trying to go get materials. And again, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, it's only going to take them 52 days to rebuild the walls. Now, I don't know if Scripture tells us how many men were employed at any one time building the walls, but we will see how that they did have opposition continually from this Sanballat and Tobiah, and some others are going to cause them problems in them rebuilding, but they're going to go ahead and keep working, which we will see not in chapter 2, but in later chapters. Now, according to the experts, this work began on August 1st of 445 BC. So, just for instance, I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. Verse 19 and 20, and we'll be finished with this main part here.
But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn, and despised us, and said, What is this thing that ye do? Will ye rebel against the king?
So there's always going to be opposition when you try to do something for the Lord. Satan is always going to impede whatever it is you've got planned to do for God. Understand, Nehemiah had prayed for 4 months that God would bless this work. The king answered his request to provide the materials and the men to go do this work. So from all purposes, we can see that God's hand is in it, and they're not going to be thwarted. But Sanballat, Tobiah, now we got another guy named Geshem. They're mocking them. How you think you're going to rebuild these walls? You think you're going to be able to do this? And notice what they say there in verse 19. What thing is this that you do? Will you rebel against the king? Does the king want this done? Well, Nehemiah knew, yes, the king wants this done. The king has given me the blessing to do this. And so not only is Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem now fighting against Nehemiah, thinking they're doing good for the king, now they're fighting against the Lord, and they're fighting against the king, because again, the king has given them the blessing to do this work. So when you come out in opposition against the Lord's work, you're always going to look like a fool. Sadly, there's a lot of people that have not learned that lesson. But we do see here 3 men that are stirring the people up or are fighting against this work that's going on. Will you rebel against the king? Well, notice what verse 20 says, what Nehemiah says.
Then answered I them, and said unto them, The God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem.
Nehemiah just tells them, the Lord's going to prosper us, and you ain't got no business here, people. That'd be how he'd say it if he was here today. You have no portion, you have nothing in this work that we're going to do. Not only did they not live in Jerusalem, because Scripture tells us where they're from, they weren't even Jews. They had nothing to do with this city. This is a Jewish city. This is Judah. You have no business. It'd be like us going to, I don't know, the Elks uptown and trying to tell them how to run their business. I don't have any business going up there and telling them how to do things. That's not, just like they wouldn't have any business coming down here and telling us how to run our church. But here we got these 3 men, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, thinking they know more than Nehemiah does. They don't even know Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the right-hand man to the king. And they're spouting off thinking, well, you're rebelling against the king? They had no idea. They're just running their mouths, which a lot of times people that oppose the work of the Lord, that's all they're doing is running their mouth. And I just like what Nehemiah says. You ain't got no business here anyway. Go on. You ever told anybody that? Get out of here. I don't know. Maybe. I think it'd be pretty satisfying for Nehemiah to just tell them to hit the road. Get out of here. Comments or questions on chapter 2?